Hello Year 4s and welcome back. In the previous lesson, we were looking at an innovation of the Emperor's New Clothes. So we looked at the original story, how it was laid out, and then we used our own innovation to change it so that we had a new story, but it used the same moral. So today, you are going to begin innovating the story for yourself. We will be brainstorming some of the ideas of what you could write about. And then in the next lesson, we will begin doing that. So I want you to pause the video now, go and find the previous innovation that we did and have a read through of what was expected of you and how we laid out our folk tale. As you can see from the table that we used last week, we split our story into having a title. It had characters, I've got main characters, but you also have the minor characters that are still part of the story, but not the main characters. We have a beginning that obviously builds up what we need to do. It sets the setting for us, tells us where it is. Obviously, we know from what we've learned already that it is not a specific time period. It's more just a setting that you, it's just a setting like a kingdom or a forest. It doesn't have a time period or a date to when it is set. The middle is obviously the build-up part of our story, building up to what is going to happen. And the end is when it comes to some form of a resolution, or we learn the moral that we are supposed to have, or moral lesson that we are supposed to have but learned from the story. So if you remember correctly, that's how we split up our story. And then in the next slide, we will obviously then look at the innovation that we made together. Remember that the moral that we kept in our innovation was one that was the one that we obviously had in our story of the Emperor's New Clothes, which was that don't let your pride keep you from telling the truth. And we kept that in our innovation. So what you will also have to do today is think of what moral or what lesson you would like someone to learn when they read your story. And remember, this can be something like very similar to the one we learned with the boy who cried wolf, is that if you keep telling lies, people won't always believe you when you are telling the truth. You could look at the one we looked at with the stone pot that stone soup, where you all had to come together to be able to get something wonderful about it, that if you didn't share with your neighbors, then you can't all partake in it and take part in something that you can always really enjoy. So I want you to think, is your moral going to be something about always being honest? Is it going to be about not judging people by what they look like? Give it a think. What could your moral be for your story? So when you are deciding what to write, you do need to decide what kind of folktale you are going to be writing. We learned, remember, earlier on that there are a variety of types of folktales that fit into the category. So you could write a fable where you are learning something. There could also be a fairy tale with magical creatures. We discussed that you get tall tales, you get animal tales. Obviously, we've mentioned fairy tales. So all of these are obviously choices that you can make when you are writing them. So what I want you to think now is pause the video and decide, are you going to be writing a fable, something that has possibly got talking animals in it, has a moral that people learn at the end of it? Are you going to be writing a fairy tale with magic and things like fairies or magical creatures that can talk as well, that possibly you have good triumphing over evil? What kind of a folk tale are you going to be writing? When you begin brainstorming for your folk tale, I want you to think about the moral that you could possibly be teaching. Here is a list of some that you could use in your story. We have always tell the truth, very similar to that of the boy who cried wolf. Do not destroy property. Have courage. Keep your promises. And obviously, do not judge. Do not cheat. Treat others as you want to be treated. Be dependable. Be forgiving. Have integrity. Take responsibility for your actions. Have patience. Be loyal. Be generous. Have respect for yourself and others. Be tolerant of differences. Seek justice. Have humility. And I'm sure there are many, many more we could think of. So think about the stories that we have read. Think about the ones that we watched about Anansi the spider and see what you decide should be your moral for the story that you're going to write. Once you've decided on a moral that you are going to use for your story, you need to think about the characters you're going to use. In our fairy tale, of The Emperor's New Clothes, we obviously had the prideful emperor. We also had the truthful boy, and we had the trickster characters, which were the weavers who lied to the emperor. If you watch the Anansi the Spider stories, we will see that Anansi, although he's the character we learn the moral from, he is often the one that is doing something wrong because either he's being lazy or he's not doing what he should be doing. If you look at the story of the tortoise and the hare, you have the sly hare who's makes fun of the tortoise for being slow and is really mean to him, and then the tortoise just carries on doing what he's doing, and he eventually wins because the rabbit is lazy and he falls asleep and he just doesn't actually think that the tortoise has any kind of a chance. If we look at the story of the boy who cried wolf, the boy is the one who is obviously the one that you learn your moral from, but he is a liar. He's the one that is always not being truthful towards the villagers. And then when eventually the character of the wolf does come and kill all the sheep, none of the villagers believe the boy because he's been lying. And he's obviously the main character that we learn that story from. So your characters could be a talking animal. It could be an actual human character. So I want you to think, what are you going to have in your story? Are you going to have an animal tale where your character is made up of animals? And think about what kind of animals you would use. What kind of animals would you think of as sly or evil? Sometimes it's a snake, sometimes it's a spider, sometimes it's a fox. They're not the characters that you would usually think of as nice characters or nice animals. Whereas if you think of a lion, you often think of a leader, of the leader of the pride, someone who's proud, someone who is scary, but he's often quite a good character. So I want you to have a think, what characters are you going to use in your story? Some examples could be an old lady. We could use an old witch. You could use flies. You could use a king, like we discussed previously, a king or a queen. It could be a young boy who needs to learn a lesson. It could be a family, so it could be two brothers. If you remember the story about the two brothers and the old man with the grey beard, and the jewels that they got, and the prideful brother who was greedy and took the jewels from the man, and then the man ended up giving the younger brother, who was helpful towards him and helped carry his bag. He was the one that ended up with all the jewels because he wasn't greedy. He didn't just take, and he didn't pretend that he didn't want to help or anything like that. He just offered his help without expecting to be paid something. So give it a pause, jot down some ideas of characters that you could include in your story. The final thing that you will be planning or brainstorming today is the setting that you are going to set your folktale in. This does link to the kind of characters that you have chosen, because if you are having animal characters, it is not very likely that you will find them in a village or in a kingdom or in a castle. You are more likely to find animal characters in a place like in the dark forest, in a farmyard. You're more likely to find characters like a king or a queen in a kingdom. You are more likely to find a little boy in a little house or in a village. If we look at the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack was obviously in a little house, and then he had a magical bean that he was able to climb up into a castle. so where the giant lived. So you really do need to think about the characters you have chosen and what kind of a setting you would have them in. Remember, this is usually a place that is easy to describe, and it leaves the reader's imagination to fill the gaps of what it looks like, more than just a castle. It will they will be able to fill it up with their thoughts about what it looks like. So, for example, a folktale can take place in a cottage in the woods or in a magical forest. You should also remember, like we've discussed, that it's fantasy time, so it's not a specific time. So we can say things like once upon a time, or long, long ago, or one day. It is not a specific time. So I want you to pause the video now and jot down some ideas of where your story is set and what it is possibly going to look like. Some descriptive words that you are going to include when you do write out your story. Don't forget to share all the ideas that you've brainstormed with us on Tapestry, so that we can have a look at what you are planning on writing your story on.